if my memory serves me correctly, you tell me, I think that in your schooling, originally, you didn't even go finish high school or finish college. Am I correct with that?
Well, I had learning disabilities when I was young and dropped out of school at the very beginning of from middle school on, and later came back to college and then went on and did almost 10 years of college. But
Amazing.
at the time I had learning problems I had to overcome, and I had to learn how to read and write properly and spell properly and speak properly. I had a speech impediment and a learning challenge as a child. I was told in first grade I would probably never read, write, or communicate effectively. So yeah, I had a bit of a challenge, but it just goes to show if you stay with something incrementally and a little bit at a time, you can overcome things.
Yeah. So now you affect millions worldwide, and that's why I kind of wanted to start with that. So I guess I have a bunch of questions now swirling. When you said incrementally, can you kind of talk a little bit about that and peel that back a bit? Because you were young then. So did you know it then, or did you start doing it?
Well, when I was a year and a half old, I believe my mom used to take me to a special speech pathologist. And I remember putting strings and buttons in my mouth and doing all these exercises to try to get my muscles to work.
Wow.
And by the time I was in first grade, that's when my teacher said, look, he went from normal reading to remedial reading to wearing a dunce cap. I had to wear a dunce cap when I was a kid.
Wow.
And so I had problems. I asked questions to some degree to kids and smart kids, and they would give me information. And I made it through elementary school with asking smart kids and hanging out with the teachers and trying to absorb information. But that worked until I was 12. And then at 13, my parents moved to a small town, and I didn't have any smart kids. It's a very low socioeconomic area, and I failed. And so I became a street kid. But then at age 18, after meeting a gentleman in Hawaii, where I was living, I was a vagabond hippie surfer guy living in Hawaii by that time. And I met an amazing teacher that inspired me to make me believe that I might be able to overcome my learning problems and someday become intelligent. And that led me to going to a dictionary and practicing with my mom the pronunciation, spelling, and meaning of 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to be able to start to read. So I started living in dictionaries and encyclopedias to try to grow my vocabulary. And then I returned, and then I started to excel. I returned to school. I had to take a GED, and I returned to school, and then I never stopped. And then I ended up graduating with honors as a scholar.
Absolutely incredible. So then I didn't know about the gentleman in Hawaii. So what happened then? Like, what did they do, say, or have you do that your light bulb went off? Because clearly the normal kid doesn't do that, right?
Well, I was riding big waves in those days. I got to ride 40-foot waves, and I was a surfer, and I was living on the North Shore near Eacott Beach Park and all the North Shore area. And I was riding Laniakea, giant Laniakea one day, and my diaphragm stopped on me. And I ended up finding out that I had strychnine cyanide poisoning. And I almost died. I was literally 3.5 days unconscious.
Wow.
And in the recovery of that led me, a woman found me in the jungle, basically, and found me and took me to a health food store to get some food in me and some liquids in me. And from that store, it led me to go to a class. I never went to classes. That was the farthest thing from me, is going to a class. A surf movie, that kind of thing, but not a class. But something intuitively said to go to this class where this guy was speaking. And this gentleman, who was an elderly gentleman who was just amazingly adamant about what he was saying and very certain about what he's saying, said that we could change our life by changing our attitudes. And if we decide what we want in life, we could go after it and achieve it. And he gave us some tips on doing that. And that night was the first time in my life that I thought maybe I could overcome my learning problems and someday become intelligent, be able to read. I wanted to be able to read. I had to have my surf buddies read to me back to those days.
Wow.
So I didn't really read very well. So that was a major turning point that night. I met that gentleman, and I'm very grateful. And his daughter and I became a friend. And his daughter actually inspired my daughter she took on his role when he died, and my daughter's doing the same for me. So wow. So it's an interesting that 50 years later, I'm passing the torch now to my daughter as she did from her father, received it from her father.
Well, I love that because you may not know this, but we're a family company. So I've got my son-in-law, Zach, and my son, Nick, and my daughter. So we're doing the same thing, hopefully passing that torch successfully on down the road. So I'm interested to know this then, Dr. John, what do you say to folks, let's say the listeners right now, have maybe similar, but maybe even smaller blocks in their mind? I think most of them are there. What would you say to them short of go look up this person that I just told you about? Like, what do you have any nuggets that you would say, well, yeah, here's how you can get some of this stuff out of your way? Just whether it's a label or a mental block.
Well, every decision we make is based on what we believe will give us the greatest advantage over disadvantage, greatest reward over risk at any moment in time relative to what we value most. And each of us has a hierarchy of values, a set of priorities that we live our life by, things that are most important to least important. My highest value is teaching and research. Lowest value is cooking and driving. I don't cook and drive. And anytime you're doing things that are high in your value, you're resilient and adaptable. And you're more objective because your blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain where you think things with foresight. But anytime you're doing something that's low in your value, your blood glucose and oxygen goes into the amygdala and hindbrain, which gives you only hindsight, no foresight. And it wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure, avoid predator and seek prey. It's a survival strategy down there, not a thrival strategy. And whenever you do, you tend to hesitate, procrastinate, frustrate, because unless it's easy and clear and pleasure without pain, you're not going to act. So one thing that can assist people, there's two things you can do. And I hope everybody writes this down because it's gold mine if you really get it. If you don't live your day by high priority actions, and don't fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, it's going to fill up with low priority distractions that don't. And distractions are fantasies and nightmares that distract your mind. So you ask yourself, what is the highest priority action I can do today that will help me make progress incrementally to build momentum in the pursuit of my dream, my objective, my primary mission in life? What is the highest priority action that I can do that will serve my customers most profoundly, most effectively? Because if you're not taking the time to prioritize your actions, your day is going to fill up with low priority distractions. It's going to devalue you and put you in your amygdala, which is going to make you live in fear. Why? Because the amygdala tends to separate pain and pleasure. And anytime you look like you get a fantasy of pleasure, you fear its loss. Anytime you have the fear of gaining predator, you fear its gain. And you're living in phobias instead of future visions. But if you prioritize your actions to the highest priority action on a daily basis you can do, and do that every single day, and then keep record of that to identify the priorities of the priorities of the priorities, and stick to the ones that actually are the highest priorities that bring the most service, that have most deep meaning for you. And then find a way of delegating the lower priority things. Because if you're trapped doing low priority things, you're going to devalue yourself. And so will the world. If you're doing the thing that serves the most amount of people and solving the most problems that mean the most to you, you're going to get the most bang for the buck serving. Then the next thing is, no matter what's going on, don't compare it to what you fantasize it used to be or how you hope it will be. Take and ground yourself on what exactly is the fact that's in front of me, and how right now is this factual experience helping me fulfill my objective. Once you see it on the way, not in the way, it's not going to frighten you. But you just got to ask the question, and don't say, I don't know, and be a victim of history. You want to be a master of destiny by asking, how specifically is what's currently in my plate? How specifically is it going to help me fulfill my mission of serving ever greater numbers of people in the real estate world or in the financial world or investment world? How is it going to help me fulfill my mission? If you can see and prioritize your actions, and you can prioritize your perceptions, and then prioritize your decisions, which one am I going to do? Either go and do what I love and delegate, or am I going to go and find a way of taking what I'm perceiving and link it to what's valuable? But if you do that, you're going to build momentum incrementally, which will be an unstoppable momentum if you do in your business. You must prioritize things if you want to get ahead.
I love it. So I had recently on this values topic, I had Brian Walsh on. I don't know if you know Brian, but he spoke very highly of you on the show. And he said there's nobody better that to talk about values than Dr. John Demartini. So if the listeners want to learn how to work on their values and get in this kind of space, what, among all the works you've done, what's the best way for them to start learning, studying, immersing?
Well, there is a book that I put out a few years back called The Values Factor.
That's what he mentioned. Okay.
Yeah, I would highly recommend people reading that. It's by Penguin. They published it for me. But on my website, drdemartini.com, there is a complimentary, it's free, private value determination process. It will take about 30 or 40 minutes of your time. I would encourage you to go through it and answer the questions honestly. Think through every word of the questions, answer them honestly. Do it a week from now again, do it a month from now again, and do it every quarter. And store them. The computer will store them for you, and it's private. You can go in there and you can store and look at the evolution of what you value. Because whatever's highest on your value, you're spontaneously inspired to fulfill from within. And whatever's low on your value, you need extrinsic motivation to get you to do. A young boy who loves video games doesn't need to be reminded to do it. They just do it. But you may have to remind him to do his homework. Well, you have something in your life that is deeply meaningful that you spontaneously do. And if you want to grow any business, you have got to be able to see how all the action steps that are essential to growing the business are linked to what you value most, or you won't spontaneously do it. You'll need motivation. And motivation is a symptom, never a solution for human beings. It's getting an intrinsic calling, something that you're absolutely inspired to do, that you spontaneously do, and build momentum with that. That's where you're unstoppable. And finding out what that is what the value determination process on the website will help you do. And then prioritizing your life. I read a book when I was 27 years old by Alec McKinsey called The Time Trap. That was the turning point in my life because I was doing a little of everything in my business when I started. When I finished reading that book and underlining it, sorted through it, I made a list of every single thing that I did in a day. I then wrote down how much did it produce per hour. And then I prioritized it. And I realized I was majoring and minoring and majoring. I was doing a whole bunch of low priority things that was devaluing my time usage. Then I wrote down how much meaning did it have? And I prioritized that because I want to make sure I'm doing something deeply meaningful that produces and find the common thread. Then I looked at how much would it cost to replace that, hiring somebody that's more qualified than me, that does a greater job than me and getting that job done that I want to delegate. And then what's the cost? Every cost, not just salary, but every cost. And look at the spreads where I can extract surplus labor value out of people by delegating. And then how much time is actually spent on it, and then the final prioritization. When I did that, I scaled up my business tenfold in 18 months, tenfold in 18 months by delegating. People say, well, I can't afford to delegate. No. People think, well, you're wealthy, you can afford to delegate. No, I delegated and I became wealthy.
Yep.
I delegated and became wealthy. That's the game. I learned to not do low priority things. Anytime you fill your day with low priority actions, you devalue yourself. You have to delegate lower priority things and get on with higher priority things.
So along this journey, I think I also, when I was just looking at some of your material, tell me if I'm wrong, I think you're a big advocate of tracking, metrics, things like that. It sounds like, has that always been something you do? And am I correct with what I had studied, just tracking and metrics in general? And how important is that and why?
Well, I keep record of everything I say want to do, because if I'm really sincerely committed to doing it, I will show progress. If I'm not, I want to know why. Is it really sincerely important to me? And if I monitor it, I can find out what's working and not working. So I ask, what is it I would love to do? How do I get handsomely paid to do it? What are the highest priority actions I can do to make it happen? What are the obstacles I might run into, and how do I solve in advance? What worked, what didn't work today? How do I do it more effectively and efficiently tomorrow? And how did whatever happened to me, how did it move me one step closer to my objective? If I ask those 7 questions on a daily basis, you're moving forward. But yeah, I keep a metric. When I said that I want to go to every country on the face of the earth and speak, I've got logged 154 countries now that I've spoken. I still got all the other countries I haven't reached. When I talk about reaching, billions of people. I monitor every podcast, every seminar, every webinar, every TV show, every radio show, every movie that I do, everything. We monitor how many people we're reaching. I metric things because if I'm sincerely going to do something, I want to make sure I'm on track and I'm making it happen. Otherwise, it's just a whim. It's not something I'm committed to.
Boy, I mean, every one of these answers is a seminar in and of itself. So when I get to my community tonight, not only would everybody be going and doing that evaluation on your site, but this is literally a seminar. Each question I'm answering, you're answering. You mentioned 154 countries. I'd love to know, kind of personally, what was the most interesting and why? I mean, that's a lot of countries.
Well, the most interesting was probably Tibet. Over 20-something years ago, before it got opened up and taken over. I was in Tibet speaking there with some lamas and also meeting in Nepal with the Bampa Lama, having conversations on philosophy there. I had written a textbook on Tibetan Buddhism. Not that I'm a Buddhist. I've been studying comparative philosophies and religions around the world for years. But I found that was just amazing. It's the dustiest, driest, most amazing place to go. Then also Antarctica is a lovely place. I've been down there twice now, sailing down there. And I did a black tie affair with about 5 million penguins.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I had to get a video of that speaking in front of the penguin. No, I actually spoke there on the ship. I live on a ship, and so we sailed down there. But we also jokingly went out there to speak to the penguins just for fun, just so I could speak to the inhabitants. I actually spoke to Palmer Research Center there. Pardon me?
I hope you have some good footage of that with you speaking to the
penguins. I have some funny footage, definitely, of my places in Antarctica.
That's awesome. You mentioned that gentleman in Hawaii. Would you say that was one, well, I know it's one of the more significant events. What would be another event, kind of a life event that either propelled or kept you in the direction or was valuable in some other way, another life event?
Oh, I could label a lot of them, but there's another one that comes to mind. When I was 14 years old, I decided to go to California because the surf in Texas wasn't the best place. So I, got my surfboard and my duffel bag, my headband and my sandals and my Hawaiian shirt, and off from Texas to California, I started hitchhiking. The interstate wasn't completed yet, so you had to go on these kind of roads. And I got into El Paso, Texas. Now you got to realize El Paso, Texas is kind of a cowboy land. And a long-haired hippie surfer kid and a cowboy doesn't get along in those days. They had a lot of fights. And so I'm hitchhiking through El Paso, Texas with a surfboard, with a ponytail and a headband. If you can picture this, 1968.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm walking down the street and 3 cowboys lined up in front of me, like Little Joe, Hoss, and Adam, I think, from the Bonanza or something.
Yeah.
These guys with big buckles lined up in front of me, and they were going to give me a hard time. And I didn't know what to do. And I, out of the blue, I just started growling and barking like an animal, wild animal. I didn't know what else to do. It's a pattern interrupt. And I just growled at them, and they moved aside, and I went through them, and I didn't get hurt. And there's a guy on the corner leaning on a lamppost, an old guy that saw that and turned around and was laughing. He could barely stand up. He was laughing so hard because he saw what I did. And he turned and he came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sonny, that's the funniest dang thing I've ever seen in my life. You took care of them cowpokes like a pro. Can I buy you a cup of coffee?" Now, this guy on the street, some old guy, probably in his 60s, wants to take me and buy me a cup of coffee. I don't drink coffee, I said. He said, "But what about a Coke?" And I said, "I'll drink a Coke." So we walk up to this little malt shop, put my surfboard on the side there, and I have a Coca-Cola with this old guy. And I had to be careful in those days because you never know, there might be a guy trying to, grab you as you don't know what's going down.
Yeah.
But he seemed like a really lovely guy, and he started chatting with me, and he says, "Are you done with your Coke?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Then come with me. I want to teach you something." And I was a little hesitant, but he seemed like a nice guy. So I followed him down the street 2 blocks, another 2 blocks, up these steps, and he takes me to the downtown El Paso library. And when I go up to the front, there's a little lady there at the information booth, and she watches my stuff. It's everything I own. She watched it. I felt it was pretty safe there. We walked down some steps, up some more steps, and sat down at a table. And he said, "You stay here, young man, And he went off to the bookshelves and he got 2 books, big books. And he came and sat them down in front of me. And he then at the caddy corner, on the corner of the table, he sat across from me and he looked at me and he said, young man, there's 2 things I want to teach you. And you got to promise me you will never forget what I'm about to tell you. I said, yes, sir. He said, number 1, don't ever judge a book by its cover. He said, because it will fool you, young man. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you probably think I'm some old bum on the street. He said, but young man, I'm one of the wealthiest men in the world. I have everything that money can buy. I got planes, homes, businesses, ships. I got everything. He said, so don't ever judge a book by its cover because it could fool you. I said, yes, sir. Then he grabbed my right hand and he put them on top of the 2 books. And the 2 books were Plato and Aristotle, the 2 Greek philosophers. And he said, number 2, you learn how to read, boy. You learn how to read. Because there's only 2 things they can never take away from you in your life. And that is your love and your wisdom. So you gain the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom through reading, boy. Don't you ever forget that, man. He put the books on the bookshelves back on the shelves. He says, you remember what I said? Yes, yes, sir. So don't you ever forget that. And he escorted me back, got my stuff, and showed me how to get back on the highway. And I didn't know who that guy was. And in Chicken Soup for the Soul, with Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen back 20 years ago or more, they asked me to write a story. And so I call it The Wisdom of One Word. That story, I wrote that story about, but I didn't know who that man was. Had no idea. And later, I had this amazing story happen. I was with Robert Coswell. There's a movie producer who did the Doctor with William Hurt. We were having a meeting in Sydney, Australia, and he lives in Malibu, but he was away from Malibu there while they were repairing his house and doing an interior design redo. And we were chatting. And then I flew the next day to Los Angeles and then into Houston. When I get from the airport into Houston, I go to the Cheesecake Factory to go get a bite to eat. And when I'm sitting there waiting in line, there's a pile of people there. I noticed that I'm going to be here for an hour. And so I saw this lady just sitting at a booth. And I walked over to her and I said, ma'am, if I buy you dinner, can I join you? I don't want to wait an hour. I see you're by yourself. Can I just join you? She says, you don't have to buy me dinner. Come and join me. We started chatting. I said, what do you do? She says, I do interior design. And I said, where do you do it? She says, Malibu. The day before, I was with Robert Coswell, and he was getting his hair. And this was the lady that was actually doing his place. It was in Houston at that moment. And I just said, you've got to be kidding. I was just with Robert last night. She goes, you're kidding. Small world. And she said, what do you do? And I said, well, I travel around the world speaking and inspiring people and helping them do what they want in life. And she said, how did you get involved in that? And I told the story. And I told the story about the gentleman in El Paso. And she started bawling and crying. And I said, you okay? Did I offend you? And she said, no. She said, that man is part of my family. I said, how do you know that? He said, that's what he taught all of us. He made sure every one of us knew exactly what you just said. It brought tears to my eyes. I said, who are you? She says, I'm Natalie Hughes. It was Howard Hughes.
Oh, God.
So Howard Hughes, when I was 14 years old, took me to a library and told me to gain the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom. My cufflinks today say love and wisdom because of that. And everything that I've dedicated my life to is those 2 things.
That is absolutely incredible. And I was talking to Dr. Mander, I told you before the show, who works with some of our associates, and she said, Dr. Demartini has amazing life stories. So that I credit her for that. That's what made me think of to ask you that. So I appreciate your candor in sharing that. So Dr. Demartini, as I wrap up, I'd love to know, like, the wealth of knowledge you have is insane. It's very effective. It's worldwide. What are you working on now? Like, what's next for you? What are you studying? It's got to be, I'm sure it's interesting.
Well, right now I'm finishing up a 1,200-page textbook on philosophers through the ages, great thinkers through the ages. I had a dream when I was 18 going on 19. My mom asked me, what do I want for my birthday? and I was just learning how to read properly. And I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth by the greatest minds who ever lived, the greatest writings that's ever been written. And she said, you sure you don't want a t-shirt? I said, no, Mom, I want to learn. I need to catch up. So I've been standing on the shoulders of thousands of Nobel Prize winners, thousands of great philosophers and thinkers and leaders. And so I'm putting together a text on some of the essence of some of their distilled ideas, reading their text and then going through and taking quotations and segments out of it. And then I want to share that with my students. I want to share with them, principles that are still valid today, that have stood the test of time. And it's mainly that, when Heraclitus said that there's pairs of opposites and there's a unity underlying them, we're using that in quantum physics with entanglement today. We're using that in the law of escalation, the law of heuristic escalation in sociology. It's used in physiology. It's used all over the place. So the principles that have stood the test of time, that are wide polymathic approaches to the way life works, I wanted to distill those down so people have the greatest education by devouring that type of work. So that's what I'm working on right this minute.
So when is that going to be at its fruition? And what's the completion of it?
That'll be a textbook that'll be part of a course that'll start October.
Nice.
Finished by, well,
I can't wait.
yeah.
Okay, officially my last question. So we teach we teach 3 pillars: mindset, skill set, and systems. And almost every guest I've had on said, oh, mindset's 80-90% of those 3 things, because we teach everybody the same course. Why don't they all go off and do 100 deals right away, right? Why do they all come out different speeds? So I think it's the mindset. So I'd love you to just some last minute nuggets for the Wicked Smart listeners on how important the mindset pillar is, which was the main reason I wanted you to come on. Of course, not the skill sets in real estate, not the system, the mindset. So how important is that in their journey as an investor or wannabe investor? I know it's very open-ended, but.
In the 80s, I noticed that many doctors, I was, practicing and I was doing consulting. I did 1,000 clinics I consulted with. And I noticed that some doctors would go to a consultant and follow the instructions and just boom, and others wouldn't. And I was going, what's the difference? And it became very clear within a short period of time. The hierarchy of one's values dictates one's destiny. And if you go and get ideas that are not in the individual's perception congruent with their values, they'll have difficulty doing them. So what happens, they've got to be able to see how the action steps, the skill set, the action steps that are specifically known to work, how they will help that individual fulfill what they value most. Once they do, they'll become engaged and they'll take off. In Japan, we've got many companies: Hitachi, Panasonic, Asahi Pharmaceutical Company, Japanese electronic computer company, Uniqlo, many companies using this value application. And we train the consultants there on it. And what we found is that nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work to fulfill what they value most. If they can see how the job description and the action steps that are essential to fulfill the job responsibility is helping them fulfill what they value most, they'll be engaged, they'll be spontaneous, they'll be inspired to do it, they'll be creative, innovative, they'll have ownership, they'll participate without having to be motivated. You don't need to micromanage, and you don't need to have to push people uphill and everything else. But if they're not engaged and they can't see how those job duties are going to help them fulfill what they deeply have as a value, the highest priority in their life, they're going to hesitate, they're going to procrastinate, they're going to come back because they can't see, because every decision they make is based on what they value most. So identifying the action steps that are proven to work, finding out what their highest values are, and making links, how specifically is doing that action going to help you fulfill it. The moment they see it and they make links, the more they do, they neuroplastically myelinate the pathways in the brain where they now take action spontaneously. That's the mindset. The mindset is liberated to be free and spontaneous and inspired in action the moment they can see the pathways in the brain of how whatever's needed to get the goal done will help them fulfill what they deeply have as a priority and the most inspiring value in their life that they're pursuing. I've seen it over and over again. I can demonstrate it. It works. It's just a matter of asking the question. The quality of our life is based on the quality of the questions we ask. If we ask questions that liberate us from our anxieties and clarify the executive center function, we take action.
What's incredible is we talked about values at the first or second question, and then it came full circle, and that obviously was intentional. I'm just asking some cool questions that I want to know about. So that was fun. John, super appreciate your candor, your knowledge, your years of work. Once more, how can they reach you? Best way to reach out and find you besides drdemartini.com?
That's it, just drdemartini.com, or they can go on there is all the links to social media. If you just look at my name online, you'll find, I think we have 1 million videos.
Yeah, they won't have trouble finding you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.